Joining us now, ladies and gentlemen, is a man who was a general manager in the NFL, multiple-time Super Bowl champion, a TED Talker, a podcast host, a live show host, and an email newsletter founder and the Daily Coach. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Lombardi.
Yeah, Lombo.
Lombo,
how we doing?
Great. We're talking about free agency deals, and Chuck Pagano said, feels like everybody was a winner except for one team, the Dallas Cowboys. Why is everybody viewing it that way? Do you think the 2 years left on the rookie contract plays a part of this, or why do you think that deal goes down?
I think what Dallas likes to do, and they did it with Trey Lance, is they typically grade players in college. And if the college grade is something that they really like, and in this case, I think they really liked Mingo coming out, like they love Trey Lance coming out. They had a very high grade on Trey Lance coming out. They traded for Trey Lance. They've ignored whatever happened in pro football. They're saying that our scouting process, what we believed of him as a player coming out in the draft, is worth a fourth-round pick because we've really seen no evidence that we're wrong based on what we graded him in college. And look, there's a lot of circumstances in Carolina. I mean, my first reaction to the trade was the last team I would look for a receiver might be the Carolina Panthers because they only have 3 on the roster right now, and they traded 2 of them away. So this is really about the Cowboys' college scouting evaluation more than it is what Mingo's done in pro football.
Okay, well, good luck to all the teams that made big trades. How many conversations are happening that we will never know about? There was obviously a lot more chatter, right?
A ton. Yeah, I think a lot of this is because, look, you've got the compensatory element that's out there. You know, you've got a guy who's in the last year. If you start trading away players, you start sending a message to your team. And look, we know there's 11 teams in the NFL that have 3 or less wins in it. And so there's not a lot of, the bottom third of this league is not very good. And what happens if you start trading away guys for next year, you end up sending a message through your building that you're really not trying to compete. It becomes very difficult. And I think ultimately it's a challenge because you want to make sure you're getting true value for the player. And as I've said before on the show, we're not sure where the draft's going to be now with NIL, right? We know that it's going to be a little diluted. It'll be more of a senior draft. Are those picks worth as much as they once were? I think Detroit trading for Zadarius Smith was critical. They needed to do that. I think Pittsburgh trading for those 2 players, both of them, are older. They're going to have to rely on Williams. Can he stay healthy? But I think what happened to Pittsburgh was they lost to Dallas. Right, and the only reason they lost to Dallas was Nate Herbert got hurt on that drive. And Dallas was able to move the ball because only T.J. Watt. So now they trade for Preston Smith, and they got what we would call 3 for 2. They now have 3 players to play 2 positions. And that really is going to help T.J. Watt get a little bit more rest and keep him stronger later in the game. And I think those are the kind of reasons. Look, you're not finding the perfect solution now. You're finding a piece to the puzzle.
So Preston was a 7th rounder. To your point about the draft and how I think some teams and sources are telling us from teams that there are multiple people that are viewing the draft the same way you are. With the NIL, those 5, 6, 7 picks might not be as good as what they once were because the front or the middle aren't as loaded with the talent that decides to stick around for $750,000 to play another college year or $1 million to play another college year and develop and do your thing and live like a king with zero. Think about these college kids.
Oh, my God.
They have no other.
Having so much fun.
And they're rich. Not all of them, but some of them. But that is affecting, I think, like a 7th rounder for Preston. Yeah. I think you do that. Mike Williams, they wanted a wide receiver. Ben wanted a receiver. What did they trade for?
5th.
A 5th for, I think they feel that way. I think that's how a lot of teams are starting to feel. Now, speaking of teams that are feeling and trade deadline, Cincinnati Bengals bring in a running back. Obviously, they lose Joe Mixon this past offseason. They have a massive game this evening against the Baltimore Ravens. How excited are you for this one, Lombo? Feels like we got a good game, a guaranteed good game in store for us on Thursday night.
Well, and I'm worried about Cincinnati T. Higgins not playing. I mean, if you go back and watch the first game, and Joe Burrow attempted 37 passes in that game. 26 of the targets were between T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. And you take those targets away, I think Higgins led the team on that day in targets thrown towards them. And now if they don't have him, look, we know the Bengals can't run the football. Chad Brown's a good nickel runner, but he has a really hard time they have a hard time of controlling the line of scrimmage, running the ball. You can't run the ball on Baltimore. I mean, Zach Taylor tried to run the ball when they had a chance to win the game. He had 3 runs, they got a yard, and then they missed the field goal. So this is going to be a Joe Burrow's got to carry the team type of game, and it's a challenge to do that against Baltimore. When you look at every single number in Lamar Jackson's MVP season from last year compared to where he is this year, he's enhanced himself. And Derrick Henry averages 6 yards a run. He's got over 1,000 yards rushing already. And we know with P.J. Hill not being able to play tonight, he's doubtful to play. This Cincinnati interior defense, they were trying to make a trade. They couldn't pull one off. They couldn't make a deal. They got the running back for a 7th, but they were looking for a corner and they were looking for a defensive tackle, and they ended up empty. This will be a challenge, but these games between the North typically tend to be tight, and I expect a tight one today. But the way Baltimore averages 7.1 yards per play.
Yeah.
The next closest team is 6.5. I mean, they're dominating.
They had 20 personnel groups this past weekend on offense.
Yeah.
20 is what AQ said. He counted them up. And obviously, a defense, that's very difficult to be able to figure out what the hell's going on. And they also had Nelson Aguilar, I think, was lined up at tight end on one of those personnel. And he actually blocked in the entirety. So not only does Monken have all the talent at every position that you could want and depth now, which is obviously a huge part of it, they're also taking advantage of it. It feels like every player on their offense is smart.
Yeah.
Feels like they got a lot of very, very smart guys on that offense, so they're able to do whatever. But when you have Lamar as a quarterback, you freeze the defense to begin with. Then you got Derrick Henry, so you got to fill the box. Can't be light in the box. And then now with all the weapons they have outside, they're seemingly unstoppable.
Deontay?
Especially with how good their offensive line is. And then obviously they add Deontay Johnson. It's like this Ravens team is a spectacle. We actually brought up a couple times, the Ravens need to make it to the Super Bowl sometime so that the whole world can watch Lamar Jackson and this Ravens team play. Because, there's people that only see the Super Bowl that don't know our sport. And it's like, could you imagine when Lamar Jackson steps on the field and then Derrick Henry's on that team? What the rest of the world, I didn't. And we're lucky for that tonight. We'll obviously ask you about your picks later. If you're going to talk about this particular game, we're excited for that. Let's move along to some other NFL stories happening. Chuck Pagano has a question for you, Lombo.
Hey, so Lombo, we both spent time. You spent more time than I did with the Raiders. They fire Luke Getsy after this last loss. They've named, along with some other offensive assistants, Joe Philbin, he's going to be the interim offensive line coach, was there as senior offensive assistant. They got Marvin Lewis, who is assistant head coach. They've got Coughlin, who he consults in. So a lot of those guys, now they've elevated or named Scotty Turner as the interim OC and hired former head coach of the Oakland Raiders, Norv Turner, who we know and love very well. How do you see this? You know the inner workings. You know Mark Davis, the owner, very, very, very well. How do you see this thing turning out, and which direction you think they're going to go from here? Win-loss-wise?
I just think, to me, Chuck, Mark has been very irrational. He's made very quick decisions, and he's fallen in love. He's listened to a lot of the wrong people. I think, to me, I'm not sure he has enough confidence in listening to the right people. And they talk about the Raider way all the time. I don't think they really operate under the Raider way. They light that torch for Al every week, but does anybody really understand what Al was all about? I think that's a hard conversation to have, and they have no stability or no continuity. I love Norv and Scott. That they're walking into a tough job here because this offensive line has struggled all season. Joe Philbin's going to have a tough time. They can't run the ball, and then of course they have a really difficult time in terms of being able to get control of the game. They've gotten worse since the year's begun defensively. They haven't been anywhere where they were last year. So, I think Antonio Pierce is grasping for straws here at this point, because how has he made the team better from a year ago when he took over as the interim coach? I think that's the real challenge in this offseason. Now he's talking about maybe starting Desmond Ridder at quarterback. I think they have more of an offensive problem than just a quarterback problem. They have an identity problem, right? They couldn't run the ball last year. They can't this year.
Man, they were smoking cigars not too long ago.
Having so much fun.
Yeah, well, everybody was happy, Pat. That's what happens. Everybody's happy. We're going to go to Dairy Queen. We're going to smoke cigars. Everybody's happy, and the players are happy. But now we're losing. Who's happy now? No one's happy, right? That's the problem. Look, I think it's hard to win in the NFL. You got to put a time in, and he's celebrating smoking cigars. It's great. Everybody's delighted. But I think Mark Davis has got to understand that, players play, coaches coach, and you're going to have to separate yourself a little bit from that. And I think that's been the ongoing problem. at the Raiders. Look, there's been very little success since Rich Gannon led us to a Super Bowl in 2002. There's, 3 playoff games in that time, and they've lost all of them.
Rich Gannon had that.
Oh, yeah.
He had a great pump fake, too.
Oh, yeah. Unbelievable.
Unbelievable pump fake, Rich Gannon. What a dog.
One of the GOATs.
Rich Gannon was.
Great player.
He was always great on prime time, too.
Rich made the team. Rich competitive drive, his competitive stamina brought energy to that organization that we hadn't had, and that was the most fertile time from 1999 when he signed until when he got hurt in 2003, and then that was the end of it. But since then, there's been no consistency, and they've just been and it's really sad for the NFL because the NFL is better when the Raiders are good. They really are. The Raiders, the team everybody loves to hate, the Pirate, the autumn win, all that. But unfortunately, I think Mark is just he listens and he reacts without any plan. Never confuse hope for a plan. They're hoping to win, not planning to win.
Do you think that, him passing on Richie Bisaccia, who did a great job, right, as an interim coach, I think we'd all say, right? And then he doesn't, he goes to Josh, right, or whatever. I think that's
yeah. That's
right.
what he hired.
And then Antonio steps in for this one, does a good job. The players lobby, Devontae, Max Crosby go and say we got to have. So he says, okay, I've messed up maybe with Rich. I'm not going to mess up this time. You think he regrets that decision, or?
I don't know if he does. I think, to me, the problem is they don't have a chief figure-out officer in the building. They don't have anybody there that can tell them why they're losing and what they need to do. They don't have an identity. They don't have a philosophy. This whole franchise was built on size, speed. The Raiders, a commitment to excellence. We're going to be different. We're not going to belong to a combine. We're going to find players that have great size, speed. We're going to be the fastest team in the league. And there's none of this. I mean, this is like what happens to companies that transition from one powerful force to another that don't really understand what that person was all about. And I think that's the biggest issue with the Raiders. Look, even when John came in there with all those draft picks, when Gruden came in, they blew most of those draft picks. I mean, Crosby, the 4th-round pick, it was by far the best player that they drafted. They had 3 number ones one year and really washed out on all 3 of them. None of them are on the team. They've had holes in the draft. They took Tyree Wilson over Jalen Carter last year in the draft. That was another mistake 2 years ago. And I said this to the people that worked in the building at the time. Look, you work for an organization. You should take Jalen Carter because that's who he would take. Like, just ask yourself, who would Al take? Would he take some kid from Texas Tech who was injured, or would he take the best defensive player in the draft? I think the answer is pretty easy.
Interesting. Anytime the baton is passed from founder to next, you always wonder what messages are going to make it through the transition and what traits of a team are going to be able to carry on. That Raiders team, obviously trying to figure it out, have been trying to figure it out for a long time. It's not a bad time to be in the middle of a slump and not being able to have a CFOO, Chief Figure Out Officer, because your stadium's going to sell out.
Yep.
Because people are going to travel, right, to watch those games because they're in Las Vegas. And you're in the Chiefs division. They're in the middle of that dynasty. So it looks like, Raiders fans, the good news is you have about 10 to 15 years to figure this one out.
Sure. Right. And Brady just got there.
Yeah, and Tom Brady just got there. Yeah, you're right. I didn't even think about it.
Yeah, look,
let him go.
Pat, I think the biggest mistake.
Another voice.
Chuck asked a really good question, and I think if Mark Davis looks back on, Jim Harbaugh was a Raider. His first coaching job was in Raiderland. He came in there and he loved the Raiders, silver and black. I think, to me, letting him go to your opponent, the Chargers, has to be a mistake that obviously Mark Davis has to regret, because he should have just transferred the authority of the organization over to Jim. Jim was a Raider. He always was one. That was his first team that he coached in. And I think, to me, now you're competing against
Vegas.
Now you're competing against Harbaugh, you're competing against Sean Payton, and you're competing against Andy Reid. That's a tough sledding.
Him at the Sphere.
Him with his glasses.
Yeah.
I went to the Sphere last night.
Yeah.
Did you see this thing? And then his take on it and how he would motivate the team with needing to be each individual piece of LED that makes up that entire. One of those goes out. It's like a Christmas light back whenever you're younger. One goes out, they all go out. That's what the LED is at the Sphere. I was captivated by it. That would have been amazing. Him with Max Crosby, too.
Yeah, and Wilkins.
Wilkins going over there feels like the perfect Raider, and then the season obviously hasn't worked out. They got time, though. Speaking of time, are we in the time now of a couple teams that we could have never expected? Connor has a question for you.
Yeah, Lombo, how do you feel about the Atlanta Falcons and the Arizona Cardinals? It seems like the Cardinals, they were kind of on the brink of starting over and getting rid of Gannon, and now all of a sudden they're leading the division, and the Falcons are almost running away with the NFC South with the Bucs being so banged up. Are we in the season now where both those teams might be in it at the end and could make some noise in the playoffs here?
Well, start with the Cardinals. I think they're really a hell of a story. Jonathan Gannon's done a great job. They have great mental toughness as a team. They really do. They don't give up. They stay. They're down 10 points against Miami. They keep competing. You can't name 3 or 4 plays. Budda Baker's been sensational for them on defense. James Conner, to me, is an unsung hero. Typically, the Steelers never get rid of a good player or a great player, and Conner has been great for them. And I think Drew Petzing, their offensive coordinator at Arizona, deserves a ton of credit for designing a run game. They ran the ball down the Bears' throat. They were more physical. They're not a perfect team, but, boy, they play hard. They're a tough out. They came back from 10 points down against the 49ers on the road and won. They came back 10 points down against Miami on the road and won. That tells you a lot about your resilience of your team. And last week, if I would have told you Kyler Murray rushed for 6 yards and threw for less than 160 yards, you'd have said there's no way they beat the Bears. But they didn't beat the Bears. They destroyed the Bears. So I take my hat off to them. They've done great. I think Kirk Cousins has played really well, and this Atlanta offense has been very good, especially when they can get the lead. They didn't get it against Seattle, which is a problem. I still worry about Atlanta's defense. I'm not sure they're going to be. They had 3 sacks last week against Dallas. That's the most sacks they've had in a game. They have a hard time really covering. Every game's going to be a shootout for them, but their offense has played really well. I think, to me, they've done a great job. And Zach Robinson's done well. And I think Kirk Cousins, coming off the Achilles, is a top 5 player right now in the league. Top 5 quarterback.
Top 5 interview, too. He was on yesterday. Mm-hmm. He is awesome.
Such a weapon.
He told a story about chasing down Aqib Talib in a Pro Bowl after throwing a pick and punching it out. And he said, I'm kind of underrated. You may be hearing some footsteps, and they may be mine or something like that. He is so comfortable seemingly down in Atlanta, and obviously we all witnessed and we all had our own opinions, and all of us kind of shared the same ones whenever they drafted Penix. It's like, why would you add any extra potential drama to the quarterback room when he hasn't been there? You got a new head coach. He doesn't know anybody down there. You just paid him $180 million, $130 whatever guaranteed. Why would you do that? We were all questioning everything, legitimately, and I think rightfully so. But then, as you kind of watch it unfold, it's like Raheem Morris, dog. Mm-hmm. They make moves on the secondary before the season starts at free agency. Then on offensive side, they've awoken Kyle Pitts. And in Algier, Bijan Robinson's getting used a lot more. The weapons, Mooney's going banana. It's and Kirk is making all the right choices. And he said, we started out 1-2 and everybody was getting loud. And then we just start rattling off some wins. Everybody's in it. It's like, clearly Kirk's team, it's like, they've done a great job in an NFC South that is gettable.
Oh, yeah.
And I think they should be incredibly pumped about how quickly they've changed, just like the Commanders.
Absolutely.
This Commander shit is crazy, Lombo. Don't you think?
Yeah, no, it's amazing. It's an incredible story because, look, you can make the case for Jaden Daniels being the MVP of the league because without him, would the Commanders be as good as they are? Think about this. I think they've scored in almost every single quarter. They've scored some points in 34 out of the 36 quarters they've played this year. They've been remarkable. Their offense has been really good. They run the ball. Kingsbury deserves a ton of credit. But this Jaden Daniels has been far and above better than anyone could expect. When you look at his deep ball throwing, his playmaking skills, his ability to run the ball from the pocket and make plays. With that game against the Giants ended up as a 5-point game. But remember, they were kneeling down at the 1-yard line. Whenever they needed to move the ball against the Giants, like that throw right there was, they made the plays they had to make. And I think this whole culture in Washington, credit Adam Peters, credit Dan Quinn, they've done a really good job. They brought in a lot of good leaders on the team. Their defense is improving every week. I think the Lattimore addition, whether he plays this week or not with the hamstring, they needed to do that. Remember, they traded Josh Doctson to the Eagles, and basically what they ended up doing is they traded Dotson for Lattimore when you break down the trade. They really didn't give up that much to get Lattimore, considering they gave up Dotson.
Yeah, and the offense is doing A-OK, with or without Dotson, and Marshawn Lattimore should make them better on the defensive side. You talk about Dan Quinn, and you talk about obviously having new ownership, and Peters, who I know have deep history with the Patriots. We had a chance to talk to him night of the draft because Bill was joining us and connected us. He seemed like a great dude to chit-chat with. Whenever you think about Cliff Kingsbury, okay, and I've referenced this, and I don't know if he's still getting paid by the Cardinals or not. I have no idea. I assume he is because coaching contracts are the greatest racket in the history of sports, especially if you can get a head coaching one and then get fired, and then you're able to just be a professional golfer getting paid a head coaching salary for multiple years, and then you can go catch another contract or two other places as well. Hey, well earned, though. Well earned, coaches. Thank you for your commitment to ball. Thank you for your commitment to ball in this entire thing. Agreed. A lot of time. Cliff Kingsbury, though, he's going to be up for head coaching jobs, obviously, because he's done it before, so he understands what the role is being a CEO of a team. But is there a chance that he decides to just stay with the Cardinals because he has been a head coach before and maybe doesn't want to sign up for all the bullshit again?
Yeah, I think he's – and look, I think some college is going to want to talk to him too. Remember, he was at Texas Tech. He got fired, so he's now coming to pro football. Look, the one thing when you're coaching a guy like Jaden Daniels and you know you're going to keep him, you can say no to jobs. You don't have to take a job. You don't have to take a bad job. There's a lot of bad jobs that teams don't want to take because of the cap, because of the structure of the organization. I mean, it's going to be a challenge to win some places just because of the way it's set up. So when you're coaching a guy like Jaden Daniels or you're Ben Johnson coaching a really good team like the Detroit Lions, you don't have to take a job. You don't have to take a bad job. You're getting paid really well at where you are, and you got less pressure on you because you don't have to deal with the whole team.
Agreed. I think some people believe that when a head coaching job is offered, there's only 32 of them. You're going to have to take it. But there's been people that have been picky in the past. There's a lot of offensive gurus, I think, right now that are very highly sought after. Ben Johnson, Slowick, Cliff Kingsbury's getting added to that list very quickly to be a head coach job again. Maybe he goes to West Virginia.
That'd be a good move.
He's in the area already. Maybe he's head coach of West Virginia if they decide to part ways with Neil Brown. I'm obviously not suggesting that.
Sure.
But maybe Cliff Kingsbury.
He fit right into Morgantown.
Maybe John Gruden. West Virginia. I heard
Hey, both of them.
Heard he's trying to get back into the entirety. But those jobs that are going to be open, I think there's a lot of names that are kind of starting to float around already. We're at that time of the year. Go ahead, Ty.
Yeah, Lombo, I think a connection a lot of people make right now with Cliff is the Bears potentially because of his familiarity with Caleb Williams. But we were just talking about it with Chuck. What do you think ends up happening with the Bears? We've seen all the stats with Eberflus. Not great. Pretty much hasn't beat anybody. Yeah. And then also someone else that no one's really talking about other than, I know you love this guy. You've been talking about him quite a bit on the GM Shuffle. But Doug Peterson in Jacksonville. We just heard that Trevor Lawrence probably isn't going to start this week as well. What do you think happens with both of those openings? Well, not openings, but you get it.
Let's start, Ty. Let's start with Peterson because I didn't say this. The owner did. The owner said this is the most talented team that he's ever been a part of. And when an owner says that and you're 2-7, the head coach is in a lot of trouble, right? I mean, that because the owner was expecting to be 7-2, not 2-7. So when an owner comes out and thinks the team's really talented and you don't win, then that tells me he's blaming the coach. So, look, the owner's got bigger issues than what the season record is. The long-lasting effect of losing. Now you're moving into a new stadium in Jacksonville. You're going to have to sell a bunch of PSLs, tickets, all that. You better make sure you got a program that's winning. Winning puts people in the seats. We know that. And I think, unfortunately, they haven't won. I mean, to me, I almost went out of my chair last week. You got 1:42 to go in the game. You got 1st and 10 at the 13-yard line, and you're throwing a wheel route into the end zone that gets picked up. Everybody can blame Trevor Lawrence all you want. You couldn't give the ball back to Philly with 1:04. Even if you score a touchdown on that play, it's a bad call. Because now Philly's got more time to come back and beat you. You needed to run the ball there. Let the clock go a little bit. Let the clock go down. Try to put some pressure on Sirianni. Is he going to call timeout? Is he not? But when you're just so busy calling pass plays and ignoring it, it affects your team. And nobody's going to blame the situation on that. Well, it was an interception. No, it was that call should have happened. That's why when Jim Harbaugh's coaching a team, that call doesn't happen because he's managing the game. And I think that's really an issue. And I think that's going to be a problem down in Jacksonville. For Chicago, I mean, look, Chicago's always done this backwards. They hired John Fox. They picked Trubisky. They have Matt Nagy. They picked Justin Fields. And then next year they make a coaching change. Like there's no continuity with what they're doing. And I thought Eberflus did a hell of a job keeping the forces together last year. But when I watched them this year against Arizona, they got pushed around. And, I'm not sure they're at the level. I think, to me, their biggest issue in Chicago is the lack of offensive line. I've said it all offseason. I don't think they can control the game. This whole idea we're going to throw to win. Look, I know this about the National Football League. Running the football produces field goals. But you got to run the ball to control the pace of the game. You got to run the ball to take the pressure off a young quarterback. You got to run the ball. I'm not saying run it, establish the run. I'm saying be able to control the game. In Chicago, when Swift plays well against bad defenses, they're good. But when he doesn't, it's a problem. I think, to me, this is a huge game. This game against New England this week for Matt Eberflus is really going to define it. If he can get through this one, he's got a chance to stay. If he doesn't beat New England or look good in this game and the team looks like last week, when you watched New Orleans play against Carolina, guys, you could see that New Orleans wasn't listening. You could see it. They really had no choice. I like Dennis Allen, but they had no choice. That team wasn't playing to the level it had to. You could see it on the tape. Not that Carolina plays at any level either, but you had to make that choice. I think Chicago's the same way.
Okay, we got like 30 seconds here. Quick picks. What do you like this weekend?
I think the Eagles are playing really good. I know Jalen Hurts was out, but I think 6.5. I think this Cowboy team with Cooper Rush, I think it's going to be hard. They can't run the ball, and the Eagle defense is playing really good right now.
All right, we appreciate you. Ladies and gentlemen, multiple-time Super Bowl champion, Paisan Michael Lombardi.
And